Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. We're back with our weekly crypto news. We hope you guys all had a good Easter break. How was your Easter, Michael?
It was good. Yeah, got to hang out here in Indonesia. Ironically, Indonesia celebrates all both Christian, Hindu, and Muslim holidays, so everyone loves Easter, even though nobody's knows what it's about.
Yeah, nice, nice. And the markets have turned. And I just want to start by giving Philip a bit of a shout out here, guys. Michael's obviously been pumping out all this amazing written research as well. But if you go to data now in the platform, we've got a dedicated section for all Philip's data signals, and he took 60% profits, and he nailed the top when Sol was above 250, and he redeployed on April 8th, which was within 24 hours of the bottom. So his copy traders, people that are following him, he's been absolutely killing it for us, which has been awesome.
It's a bit of a savant, isn't he?
He is. But we've got plenty of news to get through. It's always good once the market bottoms to see what coins pump the most. And we've been seeing some fundamental plays. Stacks was the top performer there for 2 or 3 days in a row. So I'm starting to get excited about this next leg, maybe being based more on fundamentals.
What's going to be the theme of today and today's episode is sort of fundamentals. And so obviously, we're looking pretty nice at the minute. It's really good to see that we've broken above sort of those key resistance levels because Bitcoin's just been range bound. But if we can keep pushing right here, then there's no reason why we don't experience blast off. And so we all got fingers crossed that this happens because it's obviously all mostly based around what Trump's doing with the tariffs. So he seems like he's cooled a little bit. He wants to do deals. He wants to talk to China. He's talking to 34 countries this week. So obviously they're sort of running by, you know, the seat of their pants a little bit. But I think if they ultimately decide to chill a little bit and, deciding today to not fire Drake Powell, even though I don't think he ever could, um, it'd be good to get some normality now and actually we can cut some deals and we can actually sort of have some stability. But it seems like we're turned the corner a little bit here.
Yeah, the stock market had that pretty sharp, quick 25% back to some key sort of support for at least a bounce here to see how high a bounce goes. And you've got to remember that the system still has been flooded with a lot of money in the past few years. So the likelihood of something like a 40 or 50% correction in the stock market, even with Trump and everything going on, I think that only happens if we, edge closer to World War III and people dropping nukes on each other and
Agreed.
that type of thing.
Agreed. Yeah. And everyone wants a deal. Like I saw a great article the other day. I don't have the data for it right now, but like China's like debt to GDP doesn't look too crazy. But like if you include all of their provincial debt, it's obscene. So you don't report on state-based debt; they only report on federal-based debt. And if on federal-based debt, like national debt, they're in a similar sort of range to the US and everywhere else in the world.
Yeah.
But if you include all of their provincial debt, it's like they can't afford to go on like in some trade war or let alone a hot war.
Yeah.
Um,
And M2 money supplies really turned around. I don't know if that you've seen that chart that's been doing the rounds on Twitter this week saying if it just follows M2 like the correlation like it has the past few years, that's looking like it could send Bitcoin to over 150,000 in the next few months.
yeah, and we've seen a few calls for that as well. Like there's been multiple people calling it for the end of the year. So this was one that you pointed out to me, which I thought was super interesting. Like
Yeah,
Stacks,
so Stacks
coming out with a new
Asia,
initiative.
we've been talking about how they've sort of been pushing to get their foot in the door in places like Korea and throughout Asia with some of the big workshops they did with the devs, but also like the institutional side of things. And so this was a cool, multi-way partnership that are going to look to push that SBTC cap to 21,000 from its current mark, I think 3,000 now that got hit fairly quickly. So Stacks also put out a technical roadmap update, which is exciting. And I think you've got one more bit of news there, Stacks-wise as well, with the
Yep.
partnership with institutional BitGo. So this is a way for institutional investors to earn that yield on their Bitcoin. So Stacks looks to be positioning itself as the number one layer two. It's been pumping big. All the ecosystem coins, some of my favorite meme coins in the Stacks eco have been big pumps the past few days, which is exciting to see after blood for months now.
And you called this from day dot. I don't think it's like looking like it. I think it is. Like Stacks is the go-to L2 on Bitcoin. Like everyone else is still trying to get a foot in the door. Stacks is the only really one that's purely established. Um,
Happy days.
so another one I thought was quite cool this week is that Russia's always been on again, off again, kind of like how China has been, but they've launched like their own trading exchange for qualified investors for Bitcoin. So we know that there's a lot of wealthy people based out in in Russia. And if they now legally can get access to Bitcoin, well, another just great fillip for the industry as well. Especially as they're pretty sanctioned in a lot of stuff, and a lot of wealthy people necessarily can't just onboard to Binance.
Yeah,
So
and just think
they
about
can do it internally.
geopolitically. A few years ago, we are talking about if the US goes pro crypto, China and Russia can't afford to have these strict policies on everything from mining to sophisticated investors and all this type of thing. So, one in, all in, nobody wants to be last, and we're starting to see that now, which is just amazing.
So this is the other big one of the week. And so I'm just going to preface this with like, I've still got some pretty significant ETH holdings. So this is not like without my own personal skin in the game, but I've got some pretty strong opinions here too. So the Ethereum Foundation researchers came on the Bankless podcast this last week to talk about how there's been a lot of angst in the Ethereum community. There's been a lot of fighting, people throwing mud at each other and other worse things. And it's all pretty much based around like, has Ethereum lost its way? Because there's these claims that there is no North Star. You know, Vitalik is going to conferences and singing like cartoon theme songs on stage. It doesn't seem like there's any value accrual happening back to the mainnet, and it's all sort of this ETH2 centric roadmap, so L2 centric roadmap. But it seems now that there is a pivot on to scale the mainnet, which is kind of what like all the ETH maxi community wanted from day one. We just didn't have time to do it because everyone's paying $50 Uniswap fees.
Yeah.
So it seems like the idea to shard the mainnet, to actually build it out and actually sort of have some implementation on base layers back on.
And this is exactly what we've been looking for. So I think it was like middle-ish of last year, I updated members and probably mentioned it on these videos too, that I'd sold all my ETH layer 2s. And that the ETH kind of needed a new theme or story narrative for this next leg higher. And it's funny when these technicals, ETH went home, as a lot of those big accounts were talking about a deep retrace, and it got to that exact level. And then we get these sort of fundamental updates about scaling with the zero knowledge technology that we've spoken about a lot on the base layer now. And we might talk a little bit about that in relation to Bitcoin too in a sec, but you got some more stuff I think you want to share.
Yeah, well, the TLDR here is that essentially everyone was looking to the Ethereum Foundation to be sort of the guiding light, but no one inside the Ethereum Foundation viewed themselves as that. They're like, oh, we're just carrying on in our own little world, just researching and tinkering away. So effectively, Ethereum's been driving like driverless. There's been no pilot. And so they've kind of woken up to that idea now, and it's game on. And we've even seen Vitalik this week float the idea of moving away from the EVM to a RISC-V consensus mechanism, or virtual machine, sorry. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know the technicals here because I'm not a developer, but the idea is that this is meant to be more ZK friendly, and it'd be a big change. It would be a big change to Ethereum's usability.
And interoperability for everything else that's EVM compatible, like Binance Chain and stuff. It's it would separate ETH in some ways. So it'd be interesting to watch if that causes more ETH dominance and how that would all play out. But it would still be a while off until they actually implement this. But interesting discussions, and ZK technology is still something that's being, I guess, sorted out yet. But they're talking about 100 to 1,000x improvements on the base layer.
Well, would chains like Binance and AVAX and Sonic and all these other like EVM compatible chains, and Monad, which is coming out, pivot as well? Because the whole reason they are EVM is so that they can be interoperable. So that would be very interesting. A little bit of like bullishness around this as well. Well, not a little bit. It was mostly bullish. Everyone just saying like why this is a good idea and why we can play around with gas, and from 100 to 1,000x improvement. Little bit of bearish like talk on it, but I would say that you're going up against Vitalik, I guess, the person who really wants to implement this. But mostly the sentiment was fairly bullish. But then the Polkadot community, which I pay a lot of attention to, was like, interesting. Polkadot's already implemented it on all over its test nets, and is due for the upgrade to mainnet like this quarter. So like in the next couple of weeks. And so the Polkadot community was like, are we going to be the ones that's now ETH being interoperable with us? And the irony of it here is that this was all outlined in a grey paper that Gavin Wood, the founder of Polkadot and co-founder of Ethereum, wrote, signed, and presented to Vitalik in June of last year. And now Vitalik has got the idea. So the Polkadot community was having a good laugh about that this week.
Yeah, and again, for people at home, Gavin Wood, one of the original sort of 2014-ish when they wrote the Ethereum yellow paper and whatnot. You've been bullish on Polkadot's technicals and that type of thing as well. So this is very interesting to see how easy it's going to be. They might wait for Polkadot to go and iron out all the bugs, and then Ethereum copy what they're doing. So fascinating.
I've always been super clear with the community, though. There's no technical analysis or chart movements to show that Polkadot is necessarily bullish at all. Like, it's really struggled for adoption, but just its fundamental tech, it's what ETH should have been. It's what ETH2 should have been. It's interoperable from day one. It's got security. It's got scalability. So that's there. That's my attraction to it.
And the only other thing one last thing I'd just add there with the ZK stuff is that there's a lot of Bitcoin devs that are tinkering, and we had some of those interviews on when we did a heap of the initial Bitcoin DeFi stuff about Bitcoin devs trying to use some ZK stuff at the base layer. But that's probably, a long way off, or a longer way off being implemented on Bitcoin before we see it on obviously Polkadot and Ethereum.
Yep. Some other just interesting news. I feel like this happens every week when we come on, but another L2 from a big team, this time from Ethena. So they've got their team L2 Converge, which they're doing with Securitize. So Ethena is one of the big stablecoin plays. You can create yield on stablecoin, and Securitize is a big real world asset platform. So another interesting one to pay attention to. This is going to be powered by Arbitrum.
Yeah.
So it's using the Arbitrum tech stack.
Yeah, and again, guys, if you've been following my portfolio and some of the recent updates I made, it's so good to see when this market has turned. Ethena is one that I own. I think the market's still screaming out for a fully decentralized stable coin since MakerDAO went away from their first principles and all that type of thing. So Ethena is one of those that might be positioning itself as the biggest decentralized stablecoin play this run.
Yep, definitely. This one is just... you roll your eyes at it a little bit. The AI16Z, which is an AI agent, one of the original AI agents that got launched, is now launching its own version of Pump Fun. And so now you've got an AI agent who's going to try and be the meme coin platform. I don't know, take with that what you will.
We've now got 3 competing basically meme coin pump stations on Solana. And again, I just wonder if it is going to be too saturated, and that gives a big advantage to stuff like Stacks, where the top 5 meme coins are all floating around, $1 million market cap compared to these others. The potential upside for Stacks versus an ecosystem that's saturated. Yeah.
It's an interesting one to do. I mean, I've never been a meme coiner at all. It's not something that I would ever recommend to anybody. I think I've got a little sprinkle of a few dollars here and there just for fun. I think I own a bunch of Flat Earth on Stacks, but...
Yeah, well, Flat Earth is the only one that I own at the moment. I'm not big on memes either, but I did say 2025 was going to be the year of conspiracies. And what have we got? The JFK files, the RFK files, the biggest podcast in the world are now talking about 9/11 and USS Liberty, World War II stuff. So if this all trend continues, there's no crazy one that divides everyone than Flat Earth.
So. The Flat Earth, yep. All right. Well, Pendle, again, another one of these really interesting yield-bearing platforms, has got this platform at the moment where you can actually go and get some pretty good yield. And so 11.6% on your stables is pretty wild. And so interestingly enough, if you're on the sidelines and you're just sitting in stable coins, there's places where you can get above 10%, like double-digit yield on your stable coin still. So something that I'm going to pay more attention to, especially if we have another big downturn, rather than just cashing out and, coming back, several months later, just going looking for those yield opportunities.
Yeah, and something that we should both take note of as well is to watch those yields, because that does also give you signals when we're closer to the top and when everyone wants to borrow and leverage up versus when everyone wants to be sitting in stables, and there's plenty of stables around and those yields go lower. So, yeah.
Big announcement here from Immutable. So the ticker here for Immutable is IMX. We've sort of waited for gaming to have its moment, and it's never come. And I don't necessarily think it's going to come just purely from blockchain-based games. But Ubisoft is one of the biggest game dev shops, dev houses that there is. And so the fact that they're partnering with blockchain games makes me think, okay, there's a run here. There's something interesting going on. This is a big deal for IMX to be able to partner with someone like Ubisoft, because traditionally they'd be trying to eat each other's lunch. So I'm I don't have any positions in gaming at the moment, but I'm just watching because there could be.
Yeah, and again, guys, probably last year sometime, maybe longer ago, when I updated the members that I'd cut all my gaming coins apart from Immutable, because Robbie and the team just seemed so professional, and then I think they pumped 60% on this announcement. So again, good to start to see some of these fundamentals bouncing back.
Yep, 100%. And just the VC, just taking the temperature check of the room at the moment. So a lot of these liquid funds are down pretty bad at the moment. So it's not just all of us retail traders, it's all of the big boys as well have all been smashed. And a lot of their portfolios are pretty public. And so don't feel too bad on yourself if you are down at the minute. But it seems like that they have been pretty vocal that they're going to shift to, real fundamental based tokens. And so this is music to my ears because it does feel like we got ripped off a bull market a little bit because it was just Bitcoin and like meme coins. And so unless you're in Bitcoin or meme coins, you missed it. Or maybe Solana had a little run there. So this is healthy. I think it's really positive that some of the fundamental based altcoin projects are looking like they might see their time in the sun.
Awesome. And that's obviously where you guys have focused your research. And I noticed a few cool other Bitcoin DeFi plays that you've put research pieces out on recently. So anything else that's interesting or taking your focus or got coming that you want to mention?
Yeah, I just sort of made a little bit of a list here at the minute of things that I'm watching right now. So obviously I'm heavy into Bitcoin and Ethereum, and I'm sitting mostly in these tokens at the moment still. I do think that the Ethereum play right here has probably got potential more upside if we do get a run. But I'm cautious that, this is not going to be a straight line up like it never is. So I still keep my Bitcoin exposure. Solana is still always going to have mindshare. Sui pumped something you can see it right here, 45% in the last week. So it's got user base. It's got, something. I think I saw a stat this week. It had something like 2 million active wallets running. So it's got mindshare, Sui.
BitTensor, the other big gainer there the past 7 days. Who was it that went on Ra Paul's podcast and gave that a good
it was Barry Silver.
Barry
Silver
right.
shilling it.
Yeah.
So he's gone all in on the BitTensor network, and I actually watched that podcast and then tried to do some heavy research on it afterwards. And BitTensor is just really difficult to understand. So don't stress if you don't get it, because I do this all day, every day, and find it difficult to understand. But again, I've listed Polkadot up there again because BitTensor is actually built on the same tech stack as Polkadot. It's all based on Substrate, and they've kind of copied the same model as well, where the BitTensor network is the main network, and you've got all these subnets, or kind of like the parachains, and they all have different compute-based tasks. And they're actually, we do have a research piece coming on this because there is now some DEXs where you can trade these subnets, and they all have very small market caps, and you'll have to trade them in and out of Tau. And so that could be quite interesting. Hyperliquid, the other one there, is always going to be an interesting one just because it still has all of the mindshare of the perps trading. So the Ondo and Ethena, pure DeFi, same with Pendle. We've talked about Stacks being the most bullish one. And I threw Aether in here as just as like a moonshot one that I'm watching. It's still a pretty big market cap of 250 billion, but it's probably another one in that sort of decentralized compute deep in space. Nice. I know some people from the team here, and they're very active and very aggressive in what they're doing at the moment. So I'm just sort of watching from afar as well.
Amazing.
But yeah, interesting times. It looks like we've turned the corner. And so, I've tried to retrain my brain a little bit right now to say, okay, time to pay attention again. Let's lock in.
Awesome.
And start to rebuild the portfolio from some of those losses.
For sure. And guys, don't forget, you can sign up for the free newsletter, all that research and data, and our VIP services for that call first Tuesday of every month with Michael, the team, and other VIPs. So, mate, keep up the good work, and we'll chat again next week.
See you, everyone.
See you guys.